Hi friends, welcome back to Her Hidden Heart. Imagine packing your bags and finding an old hard drive that sends your ex-husband to federal prison. This range is gonna be brutal. And of course, I will change my voice to professional to not to bother you with my accent. Let's watch.
I was sitting on my terrace in Portugal watching the Atlantic Ocean turn golden in the sunset when my phone buzzed. A photo from someone I used to call a friend. My ex-husband Wesley in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his arm around a woman half my age in a white designer gown. The caption read, "They look so happy together." I smiled, not from pain, not from bitterness. I smiled because I knew something Wesley didn't know yet. In exactly 3 weeks, his perfect new life would crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. But to understand why I was smiling that evening, I need to take you back to where this all began. My name is Shelby Dale. I'm 32 years old, and 4 years ago, I made the mistake of trusting the wrong man with my entire life. I met Wesley Farrow when I was 23. He was 29, charming, ambitious, and full of big dreams about starting his own real estate consulting firm. I was a junior financial analyst at a respected Boston firm, good with numbers, even better with details. Wesley saw potential in me. Or maybe he just saw someone willing to work for free. 6 months into dating, he proposed. 6 months after that, I quit my job to help him build Farrow and Associates from the ground up. My mother said I was crazy. Looking back, she was probably right. But love makes us do things that logic never would. For 7 years, I was what you might call the chief everything officer. I handled all the bookkeeping, managed client relationships, processed contracts, chased invoices, organized files, and kept the entire operation running smoothly while Wesley played the role of the visionary founder. He was the face of the company. I was apparently the invisible backbone that nobody needed to acknowledge. Wesley always referred to my work as the boring part of the business, the unsexy stuff, the background noise. He was the one closing deals, shaking hands at networking events, taking clients to expensive dinners. I was the one making sure those deals were actually profitable and those dinners could be written off correctly. We hired more people as the business grew. Connor Aldridge came on as a junior partner, handling some of the sales side with Wesley. And about 18 months before everything fell apart, Wesley insisted we needed an executive assistant to help with his increasingly busy schedule. Enter Brianna Locke, 26 years old, blonde, and apparently very skilled at assisting with things that had nothing to do with actual work. I should have seen it coming. The late nights at the office, the business trips that kept getting extended, the way Wesley suddenly cared about his appearance again after years of comfortable marriage laziness. I found the receipts first. Jewelry I never received, hotel charges in our own city, which made no sense for a man who lived 15 minutes from his office, restaurant bills for romantic dinners on nights he told me he was meeting clients. The evidence was everywhere once I started looking. When I confronted him, Wesley didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He told me, in the same tone he might use to discuss quarterly projections, that he wanted a divorce. He said we had grown in different directions. He said this was best for both of us. He acted like he was doing me a favor by finally being honest. The papers were filed within a week, and that's when I learned that the man I'd spent nearly a decade building a life with had been preparing for this moment much longer than I realized. The day after he filed for divorce, I tried to log into our company systems to access some personal files. Access denied. Every single password had been changed overnight. My email, our cloud storage, the accounting software I had personally set up and maintained for 7 years, all of it locked. When I called Wesley to ask what was happening, he said his lawyer advised him to secure all business assets during the divorce proceedings. He said it so casually, like he was reading from a script. I drove to the office the next morning. The security code had been changed. My key card didn't work. I stood there in the parking lot of a building I had practically lived in for 7 years, and I couldn't even get through the front door. But Wesley wasn't working alone on destroying me. His mother, Gloria, had always treated me like I wasn't quite good enough for her precious son. Now she had the perfect opportunity to prove it. Within days of the divorce filing, Gloria started making calls to our friends, to our neighbors. To anyone who would listen, she expressed deep concern about my mental state. She worried I wasn't handling the separation well. She suggested in her sweet, poisonous way that perhaps Shelby had always been a bit difficult, and maybe this was all for the best. The Whisper campaign worked faster than I could have imagined. Friends stopped returning my calls. Invitations to social events dried up. I became the crazy ex-wife before the divorce was even finalized. Wesley hired Harold Pemberton, one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in Boston, the kind of lawyer who treats divorce proceedings like warfare and bills by the hour while doing it. I couldn't afford anyone in the same league. I found a decent local attorney who seemed sympathetic but was clearly outmatched. The first settlement offer arrived like a slap in the face. Wesley's financial declaration claimed the business was worth a fraction of what I knew it made. His personal assets were mysteriously minimal. The real estate investments we'd made together were either not mentioned or drastically undervalued. The house in Portugal we'd bought 6 years ago through one of his LLC structures, not listed at all. I knew he was lying. I had processed those numbers for years. I knew what contracts we had signed, what deals had closed, what money had moved through our accounts. But knowing something and proving it in court are very different things. And Wesley had made sure I couldn't prove anything at all. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read every single comment, and your support means more to me than you know. Now, back to my story. Wesley's settlement offer was so insultingly low that I calculated I could probably make more money selling my collection of motivational coffee mugs I'd accumulated over 7 years of trying to stay positive in that office. At least those had sentimental value. His offer had nothing but contempt. His lawyer, Harold, sent letter after letter, each one more aggressive than the last. They demanded quick responses. They set arbitrary deadlines. They threatened to drag the proceedings out for years if I didn't cooperate. The message was clear. Sign now and walk away with scraps, or fight and lose everything to legal fees. I tried explaining to my attorney that the numbers Wesley submitted were fraudulent, that there were entire companies missing from his declaration, that the Portuguese property alone was worth more than his entire disclosed asset list. My attorney nodded sympathetically and asked if I had documentation to prove any of this. I didn't. Everything was locked in systems I could no longer access, in an office I could no longer enter, controlled by a man who had spent months preparing for exactly this moment. The worst part wasn't Wesley's betrayal. I had already started processing that. The worst part was watching everyone else choose sides, and somehow they all chose his. Meredith Holt had been my closest friend for 15 years. We met in college, stood in each other's weddings, shared secrets I'd never told another soul. When my marriage started falling apart, she was the first person I called. She listened, she sympathized, she told me everything would be okay. Then she stopped answering my calls. I found out why about 2 months into the divorce proceedings. Meredith was dating Connor Aldridge, Wesley's business partner. The same Connor who was helping Wesley hide assets. The same Connor who sat in meetings where they discussed how to minimize what I would receive. Meredith had found a new loyalty, and it wasn't to 15 years of friendship. But that wasn't even the full extent of her betrayal. I discovered later that Meredith had been feeding information to Wesley the entire time. Every tearful phone call where I shared my fears and frustrations, she reported back to him. He knew when I was weak. He knew when I was close to giving up. He timed his pressure campaigns perfectly because he had a spy in my inner circle. She used to say sisters before musters all the time. I guess that slogan came with some fine print I never noticed. Gloria's Whisper campaign continued spreading. I ran into a woman I'd known for years at the grocery store, and she looked at me with such pity that I wanted to disappear. She said she'd heard I was having a difficult time and that she hoped I would get the help I needed. The way she emphasized help made it clear she wasn't talking about a good lawyer. Wesley and Brianna became official almost immediately. No shame, no waiting period, no pretense of discretion. They posted photos together on social media. They attended events as a couple. He introduced her to clients as his partner, using the exact word he had never once used to describe me, despite my years of actual partnership in building his business. The pressure was relentless. Every week brought new demands from Harold Pemberton. Every week I had less energy to fight. I wasn't sleeping, I was barely eating. I had lost my job, my marriage, my friends, and my reputation in a matter of months. Wesley had systematically dismantled every support structure I had. My attorney started gently suggesting that maybe I should consider accepting a settlement, even an unfair one. He pointed out that litigation could take years, that legal fees would consume whatever I might eventually win, that sometimes the smart move was cutting your losses and moving on. I held out for 4 months. 4 months of constant pressure, social isolation, financial stress, and emotional exhaustion. 4 months of watching Wesley live his best life while I struggled to get out of bed most mornings. And then, one gray Tuesday afternoon, I broke. I signed the settlement. I agreed to walk away with almost nothing from 7 years of marriage and 7 years of building a business that wouldn't exist without me. I told myself I was choosing peace. I told myself I was choosing freedom. I told myself that money wasn't worth my sanity. Wesley got almost everything. The business, the properties, the accounts, the future. I got a small payout that wouldn't last 2 years, and the right to never see him again. The divorce was finalized in month 5. I was officially single, officially broke, and officially defeated. I decided to leave Boston. There was nothing left for me there except bad memories and people who whispered when I walked by. I had dual citizenship through my grandmother, who was Portuguese, and we still owned that property in Cascais. Well, technically Wesley owned it now since I had signed away my rights to everything, but I could at least go somewhere beautiful to fall apart. I started packing my apartment. 7 years of marriage condensed into cardboard boxes. I was sorting through a closet I hadn't opened in months, pulling out old files and forgotten belongings, when my hand touched something I had completely forgotten existed. A black external hard drive, my backup drive. I sat on my bedroom floor, holding that little black rectangle like it was a winning lottery ticket. Because in a way, it was. 5 years ago, during our 3rd year running Faro and Associates, our office server crashed catastrophically. Some kind of hardware failure that corrupted weeks of data. We spent an entire week reconstructing files from fragments, re-requesting documents from clients, trying to piece together our financial records like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. It was a nightmare that almost cost us 2 major contracts. After that disaster, I developed what Wesley called my paranoid habit. Every single quarter, I would copy all our critical financial documents onto this external drive. Bank statements, contracts, invoices, operating agreements, everything. I kept it at home, in my personal closet, separate from all the office systems, just in case another crash happened. Just in case we needed a backup that wasn't connected to any network that could fail. Wesley never paid attention to this routine. He traveled constantly for client meetings and conferences. The technical details of data management bored him. When he was home during my quarterly backups, he barely noticed what I was doing. It was just Shelby being obsessive about numbers again. The boring stuff. The unsexy stuff that didn't deserve his attention. I used to feel a little embarrassed about this habit. Wesley made me feel like I was being excessive, like real business leaders didn't worry about such mundane things. Now I was holding 5 years of meticulous backups that he had no idea existed. I plugged the drive into my laptop with shaking hands. Folder after folder opened like a time capsule. Bank statements from accounts Wesley claimed barely existed. Contracts showing revenue he had reported as half its actual value. Operating agreements for LLCs he had told the court he didn't own. And there it was. The operating agreement for Coastal Venture Holdings, the LLC we had used to purchase the property in Portugal 6 years ago. Both our names were listed clearly as 50% members. Wesley had not included this LLC anywhere in his divorce disclosures. He had simply pretended it didn't exist. But that wasn't all. I found documents for another LLC I had almost forgotten about. Faro Family Trust, registered about 8 weeks before Wesley filed for divorce. The registered agent was Gloria Faro, his mother. I had processed the initial paperwork myself back then, not thinking much of it. Wesley said it was for estate planning purposes. Now I understood its real purpose, hiding money from me before the divorce. I started comparing numbers. I pulled up the financial declaration Wesley had submitted to the court and laid it next to the actual bank statements from my backup. The differences were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue simply missing. Entire accounts not mentioned. His declaration was fiction masquerading as fact. Wesley always used to say that details were boring, that the big picture was what mattered, that getting lost in spreadsheets was a waste of time. Turns out details aren't boring. Details are evidence. I also found copies of emails I had forwarded to myself over the years, important communications about deals and finances that I had CC'd to my personal account as part of my documentation habit. More evidence that the numbers Wesley reported were fabricated. The scope of his fraud became clearer the deeper I dug. He hadn't just hidden assets from me. He had been systematically underreporting the company's income for years. The tax returns, which Wesley always insisted on handling himself through an external accountant, showed figures that didn't match our actual revenue at all. I had never seen the final tax returns. Wesley always said he would handle that part, that it was easier if he just dealt directly with the CPA. I trusted him. I was busy with day-to-day operations. I never questioned why he wanted to keep that one piece separate from everything else I managed. Now I understood. He kept it separate because he was committing tax fraud, and he needed to make sure I never saw the doctored numbers. I sat surrounded by papers and files until 3 a.m, my coffee going cold beside me, piecing together the full picture of my husband's deception. This wasn't just about cheating on me with Brianna. This wasn't just about hiding assets during our divorce. Wesley had been running a financial fraud for years, and he had used my trust to keep me blind to it. The next morning, after approximately 2 hours of sleep, I started researching Massachusetts divorce law. Specifically, I needed to know if there was any way to challenge a divorce settlement after it had already been finalized. The answer was Rule 60B, a motion to set aside judgment. If you could prove that the original judgment was obtained through fraud, misrepresentation, or misconduct, you could petition the court to reopen the case. In Massachusetts, you had 1 year from the date of the final judgment to file. My divorce had been finalized 5 weeks ago. I had almost 11 months left. But I knew I couldn't do this with my previous attorney. He was a good man, but this case required someone who specialized in complex financial fraud, someone who wouldn't be intimidated by Harold Pemberton and his aggressive tactics, someone who knew how to follow money through shell companies and hidden accounts. I found Regina Vasquez through an online search for attorneys specializing in hidden asset cases. Her reviews mentioned she had a reputation for dismantling exactly the kind of financial deceptions Wesley had constructed. I called her office and explained my situation. 3 days later, I sat in her conference room in Boston with my external hard drive and 3 years of quarterly backup files. Regina spent 2 hours reviewing the documents. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed from professional skepticism to something like admiration. She told me I had a strong case. Very strong, but she wanted to bring in a forensic accountant to verify everything and build an airtight presentation for the court. Diane Whitmore joined the team the following week. She was a former IRS auditor who now worked as a private forensic accountant, the kind of person who could look at a spreadsheet and immediately spot where numbers had been manipulated. She took my backup files and Wesley's court declarations and started the comparison. Her preliminary findings confirmed what I already suspected. The discrepancies weren't accounting errors or innocent mistakes. They showed a deliberate pattern of underreporting income and hiding assets. Diane said she had seen this kind of thing before, usually in cases involving serious tax evasion. Tax evasion, not just hiding money from a spouse, but hiding money from the federal government. Wesley hadn't just betrayed me. He had been committing crimes. Regina explained that this changed things significantly. If the court found evidence of tax fraud during divorce proceedings, they were legally obligated to report it to the IRS. This wasn't optional. It was the law. I asked her what would happen if the IRS got involved. She said that, depending on the scale of the fraud, Wesley could face federal criminal charges, tax evasion, wire fraud, perjury for lying under oath in court documents. These weren't small matters. People went to prison for these things. For a moment, I felt something close to hesitation. Despite everything Wesley had done, the idea of him going to prison felt extreme. But then I remembered how he had looked at me when he announced he wanted a divorce. Like I was a business problem to be solved. Like 7 years of partnership meant nothing. He had tried to leave me with nothing. He had lied under oath. He had hidden money that was legally half mine. He had sent his mother to destroy my reputation. He had turned my best friend into a spy. I wasn't going to feel guilty for telling the truth. Regina asked me one question before we proceeded. She asked if I was certain I wanted to do this, knowing it could have severe consequences for Wesley. I told her I didn't want revenge. I wanted what was mine. If there were consequences for his crimes beyond that, those were consequences he created for himself. We had a case. Now we needed a plan. Regina Vasquez was not just a good attorney, she was a strategist. And the first thing she told me was that we needed to be smart about timing. Her advice was simple but effective. Wesley believed he had won. He thought I had accepted defeat and was running away to Europe to lick my wounds. That belief was our greatest weapon. The moment he learned I was fighting back, he would go into defense mode. He would hide more assets, destroy documents, prepare counter-arguments. We needed to build our entire case before he had any idea it existed. So that's exactly what we did. I continued with my plans to move to Portugal. But now those plans had a dual purpose. To Wesley and everyone in his circle, I was a broken woman fleeing her failed marriage. In reality, I was positioning myself to protect assets he thought he had stolen and preparing the biggest surprise of his life. Before I left Boston, I made sure to be seen looking defeated. I went to a coffee shop where I knew Gloria's friends gathered and sat alone, staring at my phone with what I hoped looked like despair. Word would get back to her. She would tell Wesley. They would feel even more confident in their victory. Regina called it strategic vulnerability. I called it the best acting performance of my life. Honestly, after 7 years of pretending Wesley's jokes were funny at dinner parties, I had plenty of practice. The day I flew to Portugal, Meredith actually sent me a text. She said she hoped I would find peace and healing overseas. The audacity was almost impressive. This was the woman who had been reporting my emotional breakdowns to my ex-husband for months, now wishing me well like we were still friends. I didn't respond. Some messages don't deserve the energy of a reply. Portugal was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. The house in Cascais sat on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. White walls and blue tiles and bougainvillea climbing every surface. Wesley and I had bought it 6 years ago as an investment property through Coastal Venture Holdings. We visited once, talked about spending summers there, then never came back. Wesley was always too busy closing deals to actually enjoy anything we built together. Now I was here alone, but I wasn't here to heal. I was here to work. Regina connected me with a Portuguese attorney named Antonio who specialized in international property law. Together, we reviewed the operating agreement for Coastal Venture Holdings. My signature was right there, clear as day, listing me as a 50% member of the LLC. This property was legally half mine, regardless of what Wesley had told the divorce court. Antonio helped me file the appropriate documents to protect my interest in the property under Portuguese law. Even if Wesley tried to sell it or transfer it, he couldn't do so without my consent. The house was secured. Meanwhile, back in Boston, Wesley was living his best life. At least that's what his social media suggested. Photos of expensive dinners, announcements about new business deals, and of course the engagement to Brianna, announced with a photo of her showing off a ring that probably cost more than my entire divorce settlement. He was so confident that he had won, so certain that I was thousands of miles away crying into my Portuguese wine. He had no idea that while he was planning his wedding, Regina and Diane were building a case that would unravel everything he had constructed. The forensic analysis took about 6 weeks to complete. Diane Whitmore was thorough in a way that reminded me of myself. She documented every discrepancy, traced every suspicious transfer, mapped out exactly how Wesley had hidden money through his network of LLCs. Her final report was over 80 pages long and read like a roadmap of financial crimes. The highlights were damning. Wesley had underreported business income by approximately $400,000 over 4 years. He had transferred $150,000 to the Farrow Family Trust, controlled by Gloria, in the weeks before filing for divorce. He had paid Brianna over $70,000 in consulting fees for work she never performed, which he then wrote off as business expenses to reduce his taxes. And of course, there was the Portuguese property worth approximately $1.8 million that he simply never mentioned in any court filing. Perjury, tax evasion, wire fraud, these weren't technical violations or paperwork errors. These were federal crimes with serious prison sentences. Regina prepared the motion to set aside judgment with meticulous care. Every claim was supported by documentation. Every discrepancy was highlighted with exhibits from both Wesley's fraudulent declarations and the actual financial records from my backup drive. It was, as she put it, an airtight case. Now we just needed to decide when to file. Wesley's wedding was scheduled for late in month 6, a big celebration at an expensive venue outside Boston. 200 guests, designer everything, the kind of event designed to announce to the world that Wesley Farrow had arrived at success and happiness. He had no prenuptial agreement with Brianna. Why would he? In his mind, he had already protected his assets by hiding them from me. He was marrying a woman who believed he was wealthy and generous, not realizing that his wealth was built on fraud and his generosity was funded by money that legally belonged to someone else. Regina suggested we wait until after the wedding to file, not out of cruelty, but out of strategy. Once Wesley was married to Brianna without a prenup, his legal situation became significantly more complicated. Any assets discovered during our case would now potentially involve his new wife's interests too. It created additional pressure points. I agreed to wait. Some people might call that petty. I prefer to think of it as poetic timing. If you're still with me on this story, I want to take just a quick moment to say thank you. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that button. It helps me keep sharing stories like this one, and I truly appreciate every single person who supports this channel. Okay, now let me tell you what happened next. The wedding happened on a Saturday in late October. I saw photos online because several mutual acquaintances still hadn't figured out how to adjust their privacy settings. Wesley looked smug in his tuxedo. Brianna looked radiant in her designer gown. Gloria was photographed crying happy tears in the front row, finally seeing her son married to someone she approved of. They danced. They cut cake. They gave speeches about new beginnings and finding true love. Wesley reportedly told guests that the past year had taught him what really mattered in life. But there was one moment during the reception that I heard about later. One small conversation that probably kept Wesley awake for many nights after everything unraveled. Among the guests was a woman named Patricia Holden. She was an old friend of Gloria's from their country club days. The kind of woman who collected gossip like some people collect stamps. Patricia had met me several times over the years at family gatherings, and had always been pleasant enough, even if her pleasantness came with a side of nosiness. During the reception, Patricia found her way to Wesley with a glass of wine and a wide smile. She congratulated him on the beautiful wedding and the lovely new bride. Then she mentioned, in that way people do when they're fishing for information, that she had heard I moved to Portugal. She told Wesley it was such a smart decision on my part. That beautiful house in Cascais, right on the cliff overlooking the ocean. She said she remembered when Wesley and I bought it years ago, and what a wonderful investment it must have turned out to be. Property values in that area had gone through the roof. She asked Wesley if it was hard to let me keep such a valuable place in the divorce. According to someone who witnessed this exchange, Wesley's face drained of color for a split second. His champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. His smile became something fixed and unnatural. Brianna, standing right beside him, looked confused. She asked what house in Portugal. It was clear from her expression that this was the first time she was hearing about any overseas property. Wesley recovered quickly. He told Brianna it was just an old investment property, nothing significant, barely worth mentioning. He told Patricia that the divorce settlement had been very fair and that he wished me nothing but the best in my new life abroad. His voice was steady, but his eyes had changed. Patricia moved on to spread her curiosity elsewhere, probably not even realizing what she had stirred up. But Wesley stood there for a long moment after she left. staring at nothing. That house in Cascais was worth nearly $2 million, and Wesley had not included it anywhere in his divorce filings. He had simply pretended it didn't exist, assuming I had forgotten about it, or didn't understand the ownership structure through the LLC. Now his new wife was asking questions. Now a gossipy friend of his mother knew about the property. Now he had to wonder who else remembered, who else might mention it, who else might start connecting dots. He told himself it was fine. The divorce was finalized. I had signed everything. Even if people knew about the house, it was too late for me to do anything about it. The legal process was over. He had no idea that at that very moment, that house was already protected by legal filings I had made in Portugal. He had no idea that the LLC documents proving my 50% ownership were sitting in my attorney's office in Boston. He had no idea that the clock was already ticking on his carefully constructed lies. Wesley finished his champagne, kissed his new bride, and spent the rest of the evening pretending that Patricia Holden's innocent question hadn't shaken him to his core. He spent about $40,000 on that wedding to impress people who would be reading about his federal indictment within 2 years. If that's not irony, I don't know what is. I spent that Saturday on my terrace in Portugal, watching fishing boats come in with the evening catch and drinking very good local wine. My phone buzzed occasionally with photos from the event. Each one made me smile a little more. On Monday morning, Regina filed the motion to set aside judgment with the Massachusetts Probate and Family Court. All 86 pages of evidence, all the documentation of hidden assets and fraudulent declarations. Everything Wesley thought was buried forever. The court processed the filing that afternoon. Wesley would receive official notification within the week. He was currently on his honeymoon in the Maldives, posting photos of overwater bungalows and sunset dinners, completely unaware that his entire financial life was about to be torn open and examined by people who were very, very good at finding things that were meant to stay hidden. I finished my wine and watched the stars come out over the Atlantic. Somewhere on the other side of the world, Wesley was probably toasting to his future with his new bride. He had no idea that future had an expiration date. Wesley and Brianna returned from their honeymoon on a Thursday. I know this because Regina had been monitoring the situation and keeping me informed. He walked back into his life expecting everything to be exactly as he left it. Successful business, new wife, defeated ex-wife safely exiled to Europe. The envelope was waiting in his mailbox. Standard legal correspondence from the Massachusetts Probate and Family Court, the kind of envelope that most people would open without much concern. Wesley probably assumed it was routine paperwork, maybe something about finalizing name changes or updating records. Instead, he found himself reading a motion to set aside judgment filed by his ex-wife on grounds of fraud, misrepresentation, and misconduct. Attached were 86 pages of evidence documenting every lie he had told the court, every asset he had hidden, every dollar he had tried to steal from our marriage. I would have paid good money to see his face in that moment. According to what Regina learned later from court proceedings, the color drained from his complexion so completely that Brianna asked if he was having a heart attack. Given what those documents meant for his future, a heart attack might have been the easier option. His first call was to Harold Pemberton, the aggressive divorce attorney who had been so confident about crushing me in the original proceedings. Harold apparently went very quiet when Wesley described the contents of the filing, the kind of quiet that happens when a lawyer realizes his client has been lying to him and that those lies are now documented in excruciating detail. The question that kept coming up was the same one Wesley must have been screaming internally. How did she get these documents? And suddenly, Patricia Holden's innocent question at his wedding made terrible sense. The house in Cascais, the property he had hidden. Shelby hadn't forgotten about it at all. She had been protecting it while he was busy celebrating his victory. He had been so careful. He had locked me out of every system. He had changed every password. He had physically blocked my access to the office. There was no way I should have had bank statements, contracts, operating agreements, and financial records going back 5 years. He never once considered that I might have copies, that my boring, obsessive attention to detail might have included keeping personal backups of everything important, that the paranoid habit he used to mock was actually a comprehensive archive of his entire financial history. The court scheduled an initial hearing for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, the judge reviewed Regina's filing and found the allegations serious enough to warrant immediate action. A temporary restraining order was issued preventing Wesley from transferring, selling, or hiding any assets until the matter was resolved. His accounts were frozen. His business accounts were frozen. The Portuguese property was flagged with notices preventing any transaction without court approval. Wesley went from honeymooning in the Maldives to having every dollar he owned locked down by court order in the span of about 72 hours. That's what I call an efficient legal system. The hearing was everything Regina had promised. She presented the evidence methodically, walking the judge through each discrepancy between Wesley's sworn declarations and the actual financial records. Diane Whitmore testified as an expert witness, explaining in clear terms how the numbers had been manipulated and what patterns indicated deliberate fraud rather than innocent error. Wesley's attorney tried to argue that some of the discrepancies were accounting mistakes, that property valuations were subjective, that my backup files might have been altered, but the documents were time-stamped. The bank statements were verifiable with the actual banks. The operating agreements were filed with the state and could be confirmed independently. There was no wiggle room. Wesley had lied under oath, and now there was proof. The judge granted my motion. The original divorce settlement was vacated. A new division of assets would be calculated, including everything Wesley had hidden. Given the evidence of deliberate fraud, the judge indicated that I would likely receive a significantly larger portion than a standard 50-50 split. But that wasn't the worst news for Wesley, not even close. Under Massachusetts law, when a family court discovers evidence of potential tax fraud during divorce proceedings, they are required to report it to the Internal Revenue Service. This isn't discretionary. It's mandatory. The judge had no choice but to forward the forensic accountant's findings to federal authorities. Within a month, Wesley received a letter that made the divorce filing look like a friendly greeting. The IRS was opening a formal investigation into his personal and business tax returns for the past 6 years. Federal agents arrived at Farrow and Associates with a warrant. They seized computers, files, hard drives, and financial records. They interviewed employees. They subpoenaed bank records. They did all the things that federal investigators do when they believe someone has been systematically cheating the government out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Wesley tried to call me multiple times. The calls went to voicemail. He sent emails that I never opened. He even tried reaching out through mutual acquaintances, asking them to pass along messages, begging me to talk to him. I had nothing to say. Everything that needed to be said was in the court documents. Brianna, meanwhile, was learning that the wealthy, successful man she had married was not quite what he appeared to be. The frozen accounts meant no more expensive dinners. The seized business records meant no more confident assurances about the future. The looming federal investigation meant no more pretending everything was fine. She started asking questions, hard questions. Wesley's answers apparently got increasingly vague and defensive. Within weeks of returning from their honeymoon, they were sleeping in separate rooms. The karma of that situation was not lost on me. She had helped destroy my marriage without any apparent guilt. Now she was watching her own marriage crumble for entirely different reasons. I won't pretend I felt sorry for her. Back in Portugal, I continued building my new life. I found a local coffee shop where I worked most mornings on my laptop. I started reaching out to other women who had been through difficult divorces, sharing what I had learned about protecting yourself financially. The seeds of a new business were forming, though I didn't fully realize it yet. The investigation expanded through the fall and winter. Every thread the IRS pulled seemed to unravel something new, and the more they found, the more people got drawn into the widening circle of consequences. Wesley wasn't the only one who had something to hide. The IRS investigation revealed exactly what Diane Whitmore had suspected. Wesley hadn't made a few careless mistakes with his taxes. He had been running a systematic fraud for years, underreporting income, creating fake expenses, and hiding money through a network of LLCs designed specifically to avoid detection. But federal investigators are thorough. They don't just look at the main target. They follow every thread, interview every connected party, examine every suspicious transaction. And in Wesley's web of deception, there were several threads that led to other people who had made very poor choices. Gloria Ferro was the first domino to fall after Wesley. The Ferro Family Trust, LLC, had received over $150,000 in transfers from Wesley's business accounts in the months leading up to the divorce. Gloria was the registered agent and sole member. She had signed the paperwork accepting those transfers. She had been receiving monthly distributions of $3,000 for doing absolutely nothing. When federal agents interviewed her, Gloria apparently tried to claim she didn't understand what the LLC was for. She said Wesley had told her it was for estate planning. She said she just signed what her son asked her to sign. That defense might have worked if she hadn't been depositing those monthly checks into her personal account for over a year, if she hadn't used some of that money to fund her lifestyle. If there weren't emails where Wesley explicitly told her this was to keep money away from me during the divorce. Gloria Ferro was charged with conspiracy to commit tax fraud and money laundering. The elegant woman who had spent months destroying my reputation through whispered phone calls now had to hire a criminal defense attorney and face the possibility of prison. Wesley's loyalty to his family turned out to be about as solid as his wedding vows. When it became clear that cooperating with investigators might reduce his own sentence, he provided evidence against his own mother. He gave them the emails, explained the scheme, threw her under the bus without hesitation. I shouldn't have been surprised. A man who would betray his wife of 7 years was certainly capable of betraying anyone else when his own interests were at stake. Brianna was next. Those consulting payments she had received totaling over $70,000 were not just ethically questionable, they were tax fraud. Wesley had written them off as business expenses, reducing his taxable income. Brianna had accepted the money knowing she wasn't actually providing any consulting services. She had signed invoices for work that never happened. At 27 years old, Brianna Locke found herself facing federal charges for tax fraud and filing false documents. The glamorous life she had imagined as Mrs. Wesley Ferro was replaced by meetings with criminal defense attorneys and the very real possibility of prison time. She filed for annulment before the criminal case even went to trial, claimed the marriage was based on fraud and misrepresentation, that Wesley had hidden his true financial situation and criminal exposure from her. The annulment was granted relatively quickly because, ironically, Wesley didn't contest it. He had bigger problems than fighting to keep a wife who wanted nothing to do with him anymore. Connor Aldridge, Wesley's business partner, faced his own reckoning. As the 30% owner of Ferro and Associates, he had been at least partially aware of the financial manipulation happening in the company. He hadn't designed the schemes, but he had benefited from them and hadn't reported them. Connor's lawyer gave him a choice: cooperate fully with the federal investigation in exchange for a plea deal, or go to trial alongside Wesley and risk serious prison time. Connor chose cooperation. He provided testimony about how Wesley had directed the financial fraud, how decisions were made, what he knew, and when he knew it. His testimony was devastating for Wesley's defense. It's hard to claim you didn't know about financial crimes when your own business partner is explaining exactly how you orchestrated them. Connor received 3 years of probation, no prison time, but his career in real estate consulting was over. His professional licenses were revoked. His reputation was destroyed, and his relationship with Meredith, my former best friend, that ended approximately 2 weeks after he agreed to testify against Wesley. Meredith reached out to me after Connor left her. She sent a long email full of apologies and explanations and requests to talk. She said she had made terrible mistakes. She said she had been manipulated by Connor and Wesley. She said she hoped someday I could forgive her. I read the email once and then deleted it. Some apologies come too late to matter, like expired coupons. They technically exist, but they're worthless. 15 years of friendship destroyed. because she chose a man she had known for a few months over the person who had been there through everything. That's not something a sorry email can fix. The trials happened over the following year. Each defendant faced their charges. Each made their choices about plea deals and cooperation. The evidence was overwhelming in every case. Wesley Farrow was convicted of tax evasion on 4 counts: perjury for his false statements during our divorce proceedings, and wire fraud for using the banking system to facilitate his schemes. His sentence was 7 years in federal prison. He would serve a minimum of 5 before being eligible for parole. Gloria Farrow pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit tax fraud and money laundering. She was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, plus 3 years of supervised probation. At 64 years old, she would spend her golden years explaining to friends and family why she was behind bars instead of hosting bridge parties. Brianna Locke pleaded guilty to tax fraud and filing false documents. She received 18 months in federal prison, plus an order to repay all the money she had received through the fake consulting arrangement, about $80,000 that she definitely no longer had. At 27, she would come out of prison with a felony record, significant debt, and a very different future than the one she had imagined when she started flirting with my husband. The divorce was recalculated based on the full disclosure of all assets. The Portuguese property was awarded to me entirely because Wesley had committed fraud by hiding it. I received my fair share of the business value, the hidden accounts, and compensation for his misconduct during the original proceedings. The IRS took their cut too, of course. Between back taxes, penalties, and interest, Wesley owed them over $600,000. His business was sold to pay the debt. His fancy car was sold. His investments were liquidated. The empire he had built, largely on my invisible labor and his financial crimes, was dismantled piece by piece. I stayed in Portugal through all of it. I watched from my terrace as the legal proceedings played out across the Atlantic. I built a new life in a place that had been purchased with partnership and was now fully mine. I started a small consulting business helping women protect themselves in business partnerships and divorce proceedings, teaching them the things I wished someone had taught me about documentation, about protecting your interests, about never assuming that trust alone is enough. The business grew slowly but steadily. Referrals came through word of mouth from women who had heard my story. I'm not rich. I'm not living some fantasy revenge lifestyle, but I'm free. I'm peaceful. I wake up every morning in a beautiful place and I don't owe anyone anything. The money from the divorce settlement is invested carefully, enough to live comfortably without extravagance, just like I always handled finances. Boring, detailed, sustainable. Wesley is currently about 2 years into his sentence. I don't follow news about him. I don't visit. I don't send letters. He exists somewhere in my past. A lesson I learned the hard way about trusting the wrong person with your life. Gloria and Brianna are both out now, dealing with the aftermath of their choices. I don't know the details, and I don't want to. Their stories are their own to carry. Sometimes people ask me if I planned all of this, if I knew from the beginning that I would bring them down, if my backup drive habit was somehow a long game strategy against a husband I suspected of being capable of betrayal. The truth is simpler and less satisfying. I made backups because I was careful. I trusted Wesley because I loved him. I signed that terrible settlement because I was exhausted and alone. I found the drive by accident while packing to run away from my pain. There was no master plan. There was just a woman who had been wronged, who discovered she had the tools to prove it, and who decided that telling the truth was worth whatever came next. I didn't want revenge. I wanted what was mine. I wanted the truth to be known. I wanted the people who had conspired to destroy me to face consequences for their choices. The legal system did the rest. I just provided the evidence. Some people try to bury you without realizing you're a seed. I think about that sometimes, sitting on my terrace watching the sunset over the Atlantic. Wesley tried to bury me in lies and legal pressure and social isolation. But I grew anyway. I'm still growing. That's not revenge. That's just what happens when you underestimate someone who pays attention to details. Thank you so much for watching. More of my most gripping stories are already on your screen. Click one now and don't miss the best.